Rome was defined by ritual, and as the foremost magistrates in the Roman state, the consuls played a critical role in overseeing many of the celebrations and observances which the Romans believed guaranteed divine favor. One of their most important such responsibilities was the scheduling of the Latin festival, an ancient festival that commemorated the Latin League and predated even the foundation of the city of Rome. So important was this festival that consuls were bound by tradition to conduct these rituals before leaving the city on military campaign, and there was a belief that failure to placate the gods by neglecting this rite would incur divine wrath and result in certain military defeat. This suspicion was seemingly confirmed by Hannibal's destruction of the army commanded by Gaius Flaminius at the Battle of Lake Trasimene during the Second Punic War. The impatient Flaminius had skipped the festival in order to seize the glory of defeating the crafty Carthaginian for himself, displaying hubris that brought about defeat for the legions. Roman superstition, which was always a significant factor in the politics of the Republic, was thus further entrenched, and consuls made it a point to prioritize the Latin festival before embarking on campaign. Flaminius would be succeeded by a long line of stern consuls that embodied the Republic's resolve to never yield in the face of Hannibal. Their commitment to the Republic and their belief in the traditions which undergirded it, evidently seeing them through to victory against the greatest threat Rome had yet faced. But nearly 200 years later, Roman consuls would again skip the Latin festival, and this time the impacts of their deaths during the War of Mutina in 43 BCE would be far more consequential, as these men, Aulus Hirtius and Vibius Pansa, would go down as the last consuls in the Republican sense. A grand lineage that included many of the Republic's greatest heroes was drawing to a close. And, though the office of the consulship would remain intact, it would no longer be the preeminent position in the Roman state. Rome would soon be ruled by unelected triumvirs, and then later emperors, as the old world of the Republic was dying, and the new world of the empire struggled to be born. It was the time of Lepidus, Antony, and Octavian. It was the time of monsters. Ironically, the deaths of the consuls which led to the rise of the triumvirate as the absolute rulers of Rome was a result of a military conflict that pitted the triumvirs against each other. Fought on April 21st, the Battle of Mutina occurred on the 710th anniversary of Rome's foundation, and was the culmination of a months-long political crisis that began with the assassination of Caesar on the Ides of March the previous year. Observing how Caesar's governorship of the strategically important province of Cisalpine Gaul had allowed him to continue influencing Roman politics while retaining an army and imperium, Mark Antony sought to claim the province as his own personal fief, placing him in conflict with the Senate and Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, the legal governor of Cisalpine Gaul and one of the conspirators behind Caesar's assassination. This made him the perfect target for Antony. Not only did Decimus Brutus hold a vital province, but he could cloak the power grab in a quest to avenge Caesar. As one of Caesar's top lieutenants, Antony had spent the months since the death of the Populari dictator attempting to stake a claim as the chief heir of the Caesarian political tradition, much as Caesar himself had done early in his career with the popular hero Gaius Marius. But another figure had emerged in the chaos following the death of Caesar to stake his own claim on the dictator's legacy, his grandnephew Octavian, who Caesar had posthumously adopted as his son and made the primary benefactor of his estate, signaling that Caesar saw immense promise in the young man. But this was more than just a squabble over a political slogan or the ability to associate with Caesar and ride his coattails to electoral success. We must here remember that in the Roman world, bonds of patronage and clientship were key to social organization. To claim a position as Caesar's rightful heir made one entitled to the loyalty of his vast clientship network, which included thousands of loyal, battle-hardened veteran soldiers. To be the heir of Caesar was to be made instantly into one of the most powerful figures in the Republic. It was for this reason that Antony refused to give Octavian the fortune that Caesar had left him. He knew that if Octavian made the payments to veterans and citizens that Caesar's will also stipulated, then he would become popular overnight. Undeterred by Antony's violation of the will, Octavian borrowed money and made the payments anyway, and soon found himself at the head of an army of loyal soldiers despite his youth and technical status as a mere private citizen with no legal right to command. Divided as they were on this critical question, we should not be surprised that Octavian aligned himself with the Senate during this crisis. Though Octavian was showing his own anti-republican leanings already and violating precedent with his own personal army, Cicero worked to reconcile him with the Senate, as he believed Antony was the greater threat to the Republic. Leveraging all his skill as an orator and politician, Cicero would rally the Senate to oppose Antony's efforts to seize Cisalpine Gaul in his brilliant Philippic speeches denouncing Antony. What peace can there be between Marcus Antonius and the Senate? With what face can he watch you? With what eyes can you watch him? Who of you will not hate him? Whom of you will he not hate? Cicero was at the apex of his power and influence, even becoming the first plebeian ever to be named Princeps Senatus, or leading man of the Senate. It was an unprecedented honor, and no less than Cicero deserved for his seismic efforts to hold together a republic that was tearing apart at the seams. But, though Cicero could not have known it, his career and even his life were rapidly drawing to a close, for his ally Octavian was not fighting an ideological battle with Antony on the question of the republic, but was engaged in a power struggle with what he viewed as his only potential rival. Cicero's actions against Antony, that had earned him the prestige and influence he cherished, would be the very things to sign his death warrant. As for Caesar and Antony, in all their acts they were opposing each other, but had not yet fallen out openly, and while in reality they had become enemies, they tried to disguise the fact so far as appearances went. As a result, all other interests in the city were in great confusion and turmoil. The citizens were still at peace, and yet already at war. The appearance of liberty was kept up, but the deeds done were those of a monarchy. To a casual observer, Antony, since he held the consulship, seemed to be getting the best of it, but the zeal of the masses was for Caesar. This was partly on his father's account, partly on account of their hopes for what he kept promising them, but above all because they were displeased at the great power of Antony, and were inclined to assist Caesar while he was as yet devoid of strength. Neither man, to be sure, had their affection, but they were always eager for a change of government, and it was their nature to overthrow every party that had the upper hand, and to help the one that was being oppressed. Consequently, they made use of the two to suit their own desires. Thus, after humbling Antony at this time through Caesar, they next undertook to destroy the latter also. Displaying independence and acting as a true force in Roman politics for the last time, the Senate, guided by Cicero, dispatched the consuls Hirtius and Pansa to relieve Decimus Brutus, who was under siege at Mutina. Both consuls were staunch Caesarians, having fought on his side during the civil war with Pompey, and rising to political prominence in the aftermath of the conflict. In fact, Hirtius even wrote one of the books of Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic War, and only split with Antony after being lobbied on the issue by Cicero. By rallying the entire legitimate apparatus of republican government over to his side, Cicero had set the stage for a conflict with Antony that was not a civil war, but rather the prosecution of a lawless rebel. He doubtlessly hoped that by accruing institutional legitimacy, that this would be the end of Antony and the resolution of the long crisis in republican government that dated back to Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon in 49. But Cicero was a politician and a lawyer, not a commander, and though he had done everything right on the political front, he could not prepare for the sheer randomness and chance that lays at the heart of warfare. For though senatorial forces were victorious in the Battle of Forum Gallorum on April 14th, There were heavy losses on both sides, and the consul Pansa was mortally wounded. 1 week later, the armies again clashed at the Battle of Mutina, and the Senate's legions were able to force Antony to abandon his siege, though it came at the cost of Hirtius's life. Pansa would succumb to his wounds 2 days later, at perhaps the most critical moment in the history of the Republic, with a rebel ex-consul still commanding a sizable force, and the only person commanding an army capable of opposing him a young man lacking any legal authority. The consuls were dead, and the state was rudderless. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. Hirtius and Pansa were not the first consuls to die in office, or even the first to be killed in battle, and the Republic had institutions in place to address any potential issues that could arise from the death or incapacitation of its consuls. One notable safeguard was the interrex, a magistrate drawn from the patrician families, whose term in office was only 5 days, and was tasked with overseeing the elections of the next consuls. In times of crisis, dictators could fill the gap as well. This system was not perfect, and we do read of political intrigue regarding the interrexes, and of course the dictatorship itself was also open to abuse, such as under Sulla. But the gravity of the Republic, both its ideals and its institutions, led to the restoration of normal elections, eventually. However, this was not to be in the wake of Mutina in 43, for the Republic had withered to such an extent, and the actual power base had shifted so decisively from civic institutions to the Roman military that a rebound was impossible. The deaths of Hirtius and Pansa had left a void at the heart of the Republic, and Octavian resolved to fill it. That he had no right to do so was an afterthought. The man had an army at his back, and there was no use quoting laws to men with swords. Octavian began to realize that any republican shackles that governed his behavior were self-imposed. He was being told by seasoned old senators and constitutionalists what he could and couldn't do, but was starting to understand that the only factor that would limit the stresses he was able to place upon the Republican order was Antony himself. The Senate had no significant army, save what he commanded. The Constitution was a dead letter. Ambition and audacity would write Rome's future, and Octavian resolved to be second to no man in this regard. A letter from Decimus Brutus to Cicero also indicates that he was aware he was being used by the Senate, and would not allow himself to be taken off the board after he had dealt with Antony. Quite recently, Segulius Labo, and it was exactly like him, tells me that he had been in Caesar's company, and that there was a great deal of talk about you, that Caesar himself had no complaint to make against you, except as to an epigram which he said that you uttered, that the young man must be complimented, honored, and got rid of. He said that he did not mean to give them the chance of getting rid of him. This overheard quip would have disastrous consequences for Cicero and the Senate. Sensing Octavian's unreliability, or maybe just following convention by assigning command to a man who actually possessed legal authority, Cicero and the Senate assigned responsibility for prosecuting the war with Antony to Decimus Brutus. But instead of obeying his commands or even allying with Decimus Brutus, whom he had just saved, Octavian immediately adopted an antagonistic posture, refusing to cooperate with one of Julius Caesar's assassins in the war with Antony. Octavius, although he considered it an insult that Decimus instead of himself was chosen general against Antony, concealed his indignation and asked the honors of a triumph for his exploits. Being disdained by the Senate as though he were seeking honors beyond his years, he began to fear lest if Antony were destroyed, he should be despised still more, and so he desired a reconciliation with Antony, as Pansa on his deathbed had recommended to him. This divided front gave Antony the breathing room he needed to lick his wounds and regroup. Soon he was reinforced by old Caesarian allies, most notably Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. He was also able to engineer the defection of Lucius Munatius Plancus. With the odds now firmly against him, the unpopular Decimus Brutus was soon abandoned by his troops and killed while attempting to flee to join the architects of Caesar's assassination, Cassius and Marcus Junius Brutus, in their stronghold of Macedon. But as Antony lurked in Gaul, the real threat to the Republic unveiled itself in Octavian. Cicero had believed that Antony was the greater threat, but with the other armies tied up in the provinces, Octavian would do what Antony had only dreamed of. He marched on Rome and took the city, demanding that he be elected consul, despite being far too young to legally hold the post. Facing no opposition, for indeed there was no one left to oppose him, Octavian's coup was ratified, and his unconstitutional powers given the veneer of legality. With his position now secure, Octavian would open negotiations with Antony and Lepidus, forming the Second Triumvirate in November of 43, and quickly embarking on a bloody purge of political enemies that harkened back to the earlier prescriptions under Sulla. Carried out with the dual goal of eliminating the last embers of republicanism and opposition, as well as raising funds for the inevitable war with Brutus and Cassius in the east, the prescriptions were a calculated mechanism of state terror, coupled with ruthless economic extraction. The triumvirs used this process to legalize the murder of designated individuals, offering financial rewards to those who delivered the heads of the condemned, and confiscating the victim's property. This reign of terror resulted in the extrajudicial execution of approximately 2,500 victims, including 300 senators, with Cicero and his brother among the most notable victims. Yet, like Sulla, many were targeted simply so the triumvirs could claim their estates. The Republic would never recover, for not only were the ideas that animated it dead, even its constitutional form was disrupted, as the inherently anti-republican position of the triumvirs would permanently end the prominence of the consulship as the chief magistrate of the Roman state. For the inevitable infighting which led to the dissolution of the triumvirate did not result in republican rebirth. Though Octavian, now known as Augustus, was careful to couch his new position as a restoration of republican order and an age of peace, he would reorganize the state to be subservient to him, aping republican forms but never granting real power to the reconstituted institutions. His treatment of the consulship during his principate is symbolic of this. Augustus used the still prestigious office to function as an outlet for competition within the aristocracy, but was careful to ensure that it now filled a chiefly symbolic role. So, even as elections continued, and aristocrats worked to add to their family legacy by holding the consulship, none would ever exercise any agency, and all decisions of consequence were still made within the imperial regime. In 43, Hirtius and Pansa certainly knew that their republic was in trouble, but I doubt that either suspected in the slightest that they would be the last real consuls, that a grand tradition dating back to the legendary first consul Lucius Junius Brutus, who overthrew the Tarquins, would end with them. But, just as the Republic seems to have been born in a momentous revolutionary act, so it would end with the fateful decision of Octavian to turn his back on the Senate. Decades of tumult had preceded this moment and made it possible, but it was not inevitable. Octavian made history, but he did not set out the conditions under which he made it. Republics are fragile things, and can only be allowed to atrophy for so long before opportunists begin to chip away at their institutions. In such situations, a belief in precedent and convention will offer no respite. The enemy must not be simply acknowledged. He must be defeated.